Thank you, Fernando, for being here today. I would love to introduce our next guest speaker. He's Fernando Valenzuela. I have the honor to have him and I follow him on social media. He's a great expert in the EdTech world. And so thank you, Fernando, for being here with us today. I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit more about you. So the stage is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lorena, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to share some ideas with you and about our storyscape perspective, which I'm very convinced about. So a little bit about me. When I explain to people how I work, about 10 years ago, I realized that people that understood pedagogy had a lot of difficulty understanding technology. People that came from technology had a lot of difficulty connecting with pedagogy. Neither one of those had, kind of a grasp on the financial implications and the investment implications of doing pedagogy with technology. And neither one of the three was able to close the learning gaps using those three elements: pedagogy, technology, and capital. And that's how I position myself to develop this combination of what I call the collisions, the intersection between pedagogy, technology, capital, and impact. And this is a lot of what we're going to talk, because I believe that creative disruption comes from collisions of that. I have been president of large publishing houses like McGraw-Hill and Cengage Learning in Latin America, and I have hundreds of schools and universities that I have worked through over the past decade, as much as with the EdTech ecosystem around the world.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Fernando. And yes, like you said, how do we combine these, these worlds, let's say, pedagogy, technology, and all the resources that we need for that? So what is your take in that? What do you think? What is your approach to that vision?
Yeah, so again, going into that vision, I think one of the key elements that you need to keep in mind when you're working in education and you're trying to somewhat disrupt and change and integrate external factors, the first thing that you need to do is you need to think about the returns. And typically, we in education go for the return on learning. What is it that our students are going to learn? How are we going to assess that learning? Then you have return on investment, know how much they're going to invest in the product, in the experience, in tuition, whatever, to get that learning. But those two recently were insufficient to see the complexities of the world and the new technology. So now you need to think about the return, for example, on other assets, like the return on time. How much time does a teacher need to prepare? How much time is a student actually in class listening? How much time do we ask them to do homework? And so time in education becomes a precious element that we can optimize and really appreciate the time. Are we really going to meet face-to-face to listen to a teacher while we could do this on YouTube? Is that the right way of using time? So this is an example. So return on time is important. Return on information. What is happening? What can the digital technologies give us in information so we can make better decisions? We can have better interactions with our students. We can intervene with more knowledge about what that student needs in this particular time. So information becomes another asset, and the return on information. And then you have the return on trust. Return on trust is very, very important. Is how do you protect with digital media the students? How do you trust that what you're teaching them is going to be relevant for what they're going to use in the future, and it's going to be applicable? And that has to do with reputation, has to do with covering for the risk sides of technology that sometimes we forget about, and we think it only has kind of the good dimension. And then finally, the other return would be the return on impact. Can we provide better quality, better access? Can we include, population or people with disabilities, people that have different learning approaches, can we use technology to close those gaps? So that is kind of the initial framework that I use to begin integrating new elements for disruption, for innovation, and to transform learning.
This is a great approach because I think some of the things have had changed after the pandemic is basically what you're just saying. We had to change and reconfigure the way we think about implementing new strategies for education because we had to face the pandemic and we had to maximize. I think we kind of were forced, and the pandemic sped up this process that you are mentioning, Fernando, and how now we have to think about other elements in education. So the traditional way in which we used to learn is changing for sure. Now, there is probably resistance to that change too, right?
Yeah, there is a lot of resistance, and there is information and things that are moving so fast that for us teachers, it takes a while to adapt. Let me just put as an example. We used to teach how to do things, and this was kind of something that was required in the agricultural era, where you had to say, how to do things so, the plants would succeed. And so the learning to do know-how was something that started in education. Then slowly, as we entered the industrial era, we started teaching what to do, what processes, what formulas, what is it that we needed to know, what is it that we needed to memorize and repeat and do the test. So all of that know what was the way of teaching for the industrial era. But now it's much more complex. Now we need to think about first, know why. Why is it that we need to learn this? Know who, in terms of who is now changing, disrupting, bringing new approaches, who is transforming that concept. And there is another know-how and another know-what, which is basically with technology. So how do you do this on the digital platforms, on the digital technologies that we have? How do you do that with artificial intelligence, with virtual reality and everything else that is coming in technology? So we are still, in many senses, most of the teachers are still trying to teach the know-how and the know-what, and we need to evolve rapidly towards a different type of approach.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. So how do we get teachers on board? Because I think one of the excuses, well, not excuses, but reasons why we hear teachers kind of like resisting this new approach or change is normally because of their resources. Some people mention, oh, we don't have enough technology, we don't have enough, resources to implement those kind of new ways of teaching. What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, so first, I think the least resource that we have is creativity. I think we need to develop our own. So I always aim for teachers that dare to do things differently, rather than teachers that expect them to be fully trained or something before they can change their approach. So that perspective has really gone away right now. I think we used to think that preparing teachers and preparing students, for that matter, was kind of a game that had a specific time where you had to train and then you should do. Now, training and doing becomes permanent. And so it's kind of an infinite game of learning, applying that learning, daring to do something, experimenting, learning from that, experimenting better. So I think the best way to approach this is to think as our teaching process as an infinite game of learning and experimenting something that we haven't done in the past. And with that, there's a number of tools that we can create. I can give you some tips in terms of, for example, we need to think about projecting the futures. The design of the futures is one of the tools that I typically use that has to do with recognizing signals from the future, creating different scenes, scenarios of the future, and then different tools that we would need if those scenarios would probably come. And that creates a mental readiness to experiment and to think about potential futures. And it's not one single future, but it's always in plural. The other thing is to really focus in collaboration. I think the teaching activity was to be a solo sport. You entered that classroom and that was your business. Now we need to look at teaching in a more collaborative way. I think collaboration is the key to anything that we want. And I always call them on radical collaboration. Let's begin by trying to collaborate with people that are not similar to us, that don't know the same subject, that are probably not from the same country or town or language or social economical background. So collaborating among different people to help us become better teachers is a critical element. So I think collaboration, designing of the future, and then thinking about this collision, these things that are happening that you cannot look at it one separate from the next. And for that, it's always, you see the technology and we say, artificial intelligence is coming to hit us, but it's not only that, it's artificial intelligence in combination with more connectivity, with cheaper mobile devices, with virtual reality, with blockchain, and with other elements in the technology world. That is a collision of many different forces, and we're never ready to think about collisions. We try to think of artificial intelligence in one bucket, connectivity and mobile devices in a different bucket, and that is a challenge. We need to change that mentality to think about collisions.
That is a great piece of advice, and I love that we have to integrate everything, not just think in one aspect, separately and isolated from the rest. And the fact that as teachers, we don't have to be alone anymore. We can support each other. This is one of the reasons why we have created this, space for our community to be able to support each other, to get ideas. And also, I wanted to ask you your take in relation to language teaching and language acquisition. What do you think in terms of, disruptive innovation and how we as teachers can innovate in our classes, especially in this case for English language teaching?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating topic. First, because most of what is going to happen in the technology disruption that we're going to be living in this digital era requires English learning more than ever. So that is going to transform lives forever. Second, we need to make sure that acquiring a second language is different than learning a language. So I think sometimes we use learning language and acquiring language as if it was the same thing. And this is something different. When you're acquiring a language, this is an unconscious effort. It's picked up when you have meaningful, interesting messages in another language and you are trying to engage in that understanding. So what happens is your ability to acquire language becomes a direct relationship with the interest you have in understanding something that is meaningful to you. Now, learning a language, that is, explicitly how the language works, what are the rules, the regulations, what are the vocabulary and everything else. So I think we have traditionally mixed these two elements, and we're trying to focus into the way language works before engaging students in meaningful messages. So the kind of knowledge, when it's useful, when it's engaging, then that allows you to get or accelerate the acquisition of language. And that moves the student from being a novice to intermediate to advanced much faster. But when you're in the intermediate and advanced, then you can really begin probably refining the rules and how the language works. But there's a chunk of work that has to do with properly acquiring and getting in love with what that language can be meaningful to you. And I think that is one of the key elements that we need to bring to teachers, separate these two concepts and just make sure that there are more engaging practices for learning.
I do agree with you on that, especially because normally the curriculum is organized following a grammar approach that is a list of grammar items we have to cover versus communicative functions that we would like to work with our students and that we would like for our students to get in touch in a natural way. So what do you think about different strategies to accelerate acquisition?
So I think it has been demonstrated by neuroscience that storytelling is the best way to engage and to get students interested in something. There is a lot of data right now that it's coming through the digital platforms and in general the digital solutions that are happening, not only for learning, but for entertainment, for news, for everything. So data is the new source of stories. So what happens is that you need to bridge the gap between what you understand and what actions can you take with what you understand. And I think this has to do with stories, because stories convey emotion effectively, and emotion creates the action that you need to bring. I have studied a lot of companies in the e-gaming, esports industry, and they do some fascinating practices that I think teachers should bring to their own pedagogies, one of which is called the engagement loop. And the idea is that before any learning happens, there has to be an emotional connection. The emotional connection should immediately drive an action, and that action should immediately drive feedback. So let's think about it for a second. Emotional connection, action, and feedback are the best way to learn. The other thing that I learned in these esports and gaming that are experts in storytelling is what they call the flow, the gamer flow. And this is translated very simply by saying, when a student loses in a game, they immediately want to play again. They want to try it again. If we think in education, when a student does not do good, they don't want to try again. They feel a failure, right? So we need to design for students to fail, but with an aim to try it again. And when a student does well, what happens is they want to aim higher. So imagine these two simple concepts, that you fail and you want to try again, and you succeed and you basically want to try something bigger. If we could accomplish this in education, I think would be wonderful. And I think then the storytelling is something that we remember what we feel. We don't remember if we did, a mistake on grammar. We don't remember. We remember how we feel. So the stories are concrete. They have the ability to transport our imagination to a place. We can visualize events, and that creates a learning that remains. So I think we need to really move away from that. I think the stories should be memorable. They should be things that we remember what we feel, and they represent let me call this a pull strategy as opposed to a push strategy. When we're trying to teach them to pass an exam, it's like a push strategy. Most students would say, teacher, is that going to come in the test? That's the worst thing that could happen to us. That's a push strategy. We need to move through a pull strategy where the students say, I want to learn more. I'm not sure I understand this correctly, because they are arguing that the stories are already engaging the listening, pulling them to the story. They are participating in the conversation than just telling them what to think, what to do, what to memorize, and what to do. So storytelling to me is the creative learning tool that offers the best reflection, the best learning outcomes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And as a part of the Storyscape team, I can say that it is innovative and disruptive because our Storyscape is a curriculum design and based on stories to cover a whole level. So it's something so different for teachers that it's never been done before, at least in Latin America. And so I think this is something in relation to disruptive innovation that it's worth trying. And I think we should definitely encourage teachers to do this and any that other of the strategies that you mentioned that are going to make learning and incorporate all the different views and viewpoints because learning is not the same as it used to be, like you said, Fernando, and it's definitely changing and we need to adapt, right? How
No,
do you see?
I think, Lorena, what is happening, I mean, we are entering the era of artificial intelligence, and I had a workshop yesterday with about 40 teachers about ChatGPT and what it means. And we're basically interacting with machines in a way, in a conversational way that we haven't had before. The machine is going to talk back to us, is going to talk to us almost as if it were humans. So the first thing is that you need to also recognize that this technology is not going to be perfect. They are risks, but the students themselves and the teachers, they need to learn how to create this dialogue, how to express themselves to the computer, to the machine, and what answers do we want. So essentially, this is at the heart of storytelling because you have to express, how and why, and what is your voice, and what is the context, and what is the narrative that you want this computer to bring you back, and then you have to refine it. There are still teachers that believe that they can block ChatGPT or they shouldn't get involved with artificial intelligence, and this reminds me of the era of the calculator, where teachers were trying to block the calculator from coming. So I think basically we're going to have to become more humans. And the only way to become more humans is through the way we tell stories, the way we construct our human identity, the way we give meaning to life, meaning to incidents. But basically, we're going to have to tell stories that are complemented with technology. So this is going to be an art using language, communication, emotions, even movements, because this is going to be transmedia. So you're going to have a story that is going to start with text, there's going to go video, there's going to be audio, there's going to be, characters that are built by the machine, there's going to be real characters, there's going to be historical characters, voices, everything is going to come together. So this is a crucial aspect of storytelling. We have to give feedback on how we connect with audiences, demonstrate the visual effects, integrate different technologies. But basically, a story is never one subject. A story is multidisciplinary, is contextual, and it has the human identity at heart.
Thank you, Fernando. I apologize. My connection was a little bit slow. So that's the reason why I lost you for a second. I agree with you on all the different aspects in which we can support learning and acquisition in this case with stories and storytelling, and how this is a great bridge that we have to cross through technology, and how that can enhance and make even the storytelling experience even better. So I think this is a great point that you raised. And is there any final message you have for our audience and for language teachers that you would like to leave us with? You have shared so many strategies and ideas.
Yeah, so again, I would say a message of optimism. I think we are about to enter a very fascinating era. I think we as teachers have the greatest opportunity to really impact our students if we do things differently. So we need to create this new universe. We need to make sure that everybody understands it. We need to collaborate with different people. We need to prepare for unforeseen events, for things that are going to happen faster than we can imagine. But we need to get back to our humanity. We need to get back to our stories, our individual, our questioning, our emotional context. We need to emphasize emotions as well. And I think all of these elements call for a different type of teaching. And that's why I'm very committed to this idea of the digital skills, the language acquisition focus that you need to bring, and then using storytelling to develop better ways of teaching and producing storytellers in our students. That's going to be a critical element for their success in the future.
I totally agree with you on that, Fernando. It's been a pleasure. And I think we all have a lot to think about and, look for different ways to be part of this disruptive innovation in education and especially in language acquisition. And I really would like to thank you today for taking the time to be with us. And we hope to have you soon in another session, Fernando.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me and looking forward for more conversations around this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining our Facebook Live. You can rewatch it and we'll hope to see you soon next month with our fourth session. Take care. Bye, Fernando. Bye, everyone.